the features of poetry until meter. Okay, we understood that a meter is in fact the arrangement of stresses and unstresses in a line.
And it contains 5 stress in a meter.
Yeah, if that is the case, if a line contains 5 stresses in a line, then it is called a pentameter. Okay, so these are in fact kind of Latin prefixes, you know, penta, hexa, and we just add them before the word meter. Okay, so pentameter would have 5 stresses in it. I want you to identify the number of stresses and unstresses in the stanza that I showed you before the presentation today. I'll show you the stanza once again after I finish this presentation. Alright? But today we are going to start our lecture on verse form. Now, the first feature of poetry is meter, which means that all the lines in a poem must have a certain meter in them, and that meter is consistent throughout the poem. So it's not easy to write poetry. The poet has to take care of that throughout the poem she or he has to consistently follow a certain arrangement of stresses and unstresses or certain meter. In Urdu we are aware of radif, kafiya. So the poets have to be aware of that and have to strictly follow certain rules while writing a poem. So is the case in English poetry. Now, today we are going to start our discussion about verse form. By verse form we mean that just like the arrangement of words within one line, just like that, lines themselves are arranged in a certain manner in a total poem. So what is verse form? Verse form is group of lines. How lines are grouped together. Sometimes we find a poem in which just 7 or 9 lines have been composed together. Sometimes we find a kind of paragraphs, each paragraph having 7 lines or maybe 10 lines. What does that mean? That means there are so many ways a poet can arrange the lines or group the lines together in a poem. Now technically, a paragraph in poetry is called a stanza. Here is the word. I'm sure most of you are aware of that. There are kinds of stanzas. Some are called quatrain. Can you guess how many lines a quatrain might have? Excellent, 4. Quatrain, quarter, the word comes from quarter. You know quarter means 4. And then there are lines which are called, there are verse forms which are called couplet or a couplet. A couplet would have 2 lines in it. Are you getting this point? And then there could be groups of lines which are called tercet. A tercet has 3 lines in it. And then we might have sestet. A sestet is a stanza which would have 6 lines in it. And finally, we have octet. Octet is a stanza which has 8 lines in it. This is the general arrangement of lines and general grouping of lines in poetry. We do not very often find a stanza having 7 lines in it. That is not a common practice, okay? That is why we do not have a word for that. Now, the kinds of stanzas that you see in this highlighted line over here, these are recognized on the basis of number of lines in them. But then there are some stanzas which have some additional unique features in addition to just the number of lines. Those stanzas are famous with different names. One of them is ballad stanza. So ballad stanza is a term for a certain kind of stanza which is a quatrain. What does a quatrain mean?
4 lines.
A stanza with 4 lines. Quatrain, quarter, 4 but it consists of tetrameters and trimeters in such a manner that tetrameters and trimeters, they alternate each other. So the first line could be a tetrameter and the second line could be a trimeter. Again tetrameter, trimeter, tetrameter, trimeter. So not just the 4 lines, but also those lines occur in an order, in a certain order with a certain meter. Okay, so there could be a metrical arrangement of lines as well. All right, or there could be arrangement of lines on the basis of the meter of each line as well. Then there is another kind of stanza. It is called the Spenserian stanza. Are you aware of the name Spenser? Anybody who can tell who he was? He was a poet. He was a poet, okay? A medieval poet. Now, a kind of stanza is famous because of his name, because he is the one who practiced that stanza in his very, very famous poem called The Fairy Queen. It is a long epic poem which consists of, like, I think 7 books or so. Huge poem. And he practiced this stanza throughout the book in a very consistent manner. So much so that the poets who came after him, they started adopting that writing style for their own poetry as well. So what kind of stanza did he have? He had this kind of stanza with 8 iambic pentameters followed by 1 iambic hexameter. So that means there were 8 lines. Each one of them was iambic pentameter. And then after those 8 lines, there was a 9th line which was iambic hexameter. All right.
Can you give us an example?
Well, I could show you, in fact, a stanza from Spenser himself. Let me finish with this because I'll have to, undo the multimedia for that. But I can show you later on after the presentation is over. Last feature of poetry that we are covering is called rhyme. Okay, so meter, verse form, and the last feature of poetry is called rhyme. Now, what is a rhyme? Rhyme is arrangement of words with respect to their sounds in a particular poem or in a particular stanza. Now, if you look at this stanza by Donne, by John Donne, The Good Morrow, anybody could like to read this stanza really loud for the whole class? If you can see it clearly, would you like to go ahead, please?
And now good morrow to our waking souls, which watch not one another out of fear, for love all love of other sides controls, and makes one little room and everywhere. Let's see discovers two new words have gone. Let's map to other words on words have shown. Let us possess with one word, each has one and is one.
Okay, thank you. Now, you might notice in all of these lines that there is a certain pattern of the sounds at which all these lines end. So, can you tell me the ending of which line matches with the ending of this line that I have highlighted? Third, very good. Okay, hold on. So, controls. All right. Souls, controls. Good. Now, sound of. Okay, let's go back then on to fear. It matches with everywhere. 4. And then gone, shone, and one. Now, as you read more poetry, you will observe that this pattern of matching the sounds is very consistently followed by the poet in their poems. The poems might comprise thousands of lines. Some poems are very big. Can you think of any example of a poem which is very big? In English, of course. Not at this stage. Anyways, there is a famous poem called Paradise Lost. Do you know any Urdu poet who was influenced by Paradise Lost? Allama Iqbal, right? Not Sakinama, but there is another poem by Iqbal, which is, of course, you know that, Shikwa. Okay, so Paradise Lost was kind of in Paradise Lost influenced Shikwa, and there was another poem by the same poet John Milton, Paradise Regained, and then Jawab-e Shikwa was kind of influenced by Paradise Regained. Anyways, Paradise Lost is a huge poem, has I think 11 or 12 books in it, okay, parts of it. But you will observe that throughout the poem, the poet strictly follows the matching of sounds at the end of lines. The pattern is not same as this one always. Over here, there is a certain pattern, but in every other poem or poet, the pattern will be different. Now, if you look at this line under the stanza, it says rhyme A, B, C, C, C. I think it is already obvious to you that this what appears to be a chemical formula, you know, something like H2O, HCl, appears to be like that, in fact is a formula for the rhymes of this particular stanza. So the first A stands for the first sound, souls, and then B stands for a sound which is different from the first sound, which is fear. But then you have to write A once again because the sound of the third line matches with the sound of the first line. So A over here shows that the sound in this particular line is same as sound of the first line. And then B again. Why? Because everywhere matches with the second line over here to which we assign the letter B. And then for these three lines, we see gone, shone, won. All these three match with each other, but all these three are different from all above lines. Therefore, we assign a new letter to last three lines, which is C. But then we repeat C, 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 because all three lines match in their rhyme. Now, this way of identifying the sound patterns in a stanza is called rhyme scheme. This is the rhyme scheme of this particular stanza, and this is how we write it. Okay, we write it like this. We always use capital letters just like this, uppercase letters, and then we put them down just like this. So first new sound, assign a letter to it. Second new sound, assign a different letter to it. Third new sound, again assign a still different letter to it. But if the fourth sound matches with the first one, then assign the same letter to the fourth sound which you assign to the first line. Okay, like this. So you will always come across the stanzas which would have different rhyme scheme. So this A, B, C, C, C won't be the same for every stanza. Did you get this point? Very good.